Welcome back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself, Kyle Teixeira, sitting next to this guy, John Teixeira, once again. We are here to discuss this week restricting short-term rentals. If you would like to discuss this topic, just listen in. Give us a call about anything else, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. John, let's get into it. Are we trying to restrict short-term rentals? Let's answer that one first.
No, we are not.
We're just going to talk about, well, this is probably going to be a pretty broad conversation, but and specific, I guess, at the same time. But restricting short-term rentals, should they do it? What's the effects of doing it? Why are we talking about it? Because it's talked about a lot ever since it came up. I mean, ever since Airbnb hit the ground running, and vacation rentals and short-term rentals really took center stage through COVID and everything, there has been an uprising of what do we do about this? Because it really fell into a non-regulated area of real estate.
And that's one of the big problems, right? So cities are looking at just that, we regulate our hotels, we monitor them, we make sure that the consumers are safe, and we get taxes from them. Most importantly, is probably their biggest concern.
Mm-hmm.
And now all these people are putting their houses up, treating them like hotels, and we're not getting taxes. Some are, but we're not getting taxes like we are with the hotels. We're not able to monitor them. We're not able to make sure that the consumer is safe. That's in essence the problem.
Well, let's talk about who has the ability to restrict, or where are we at right now? So you have, let's say you got federal government, you got state governments, then you got county governments, then you got city governments, then you got HOAs, right? Mm-hmm. That's really how it goes. So a lot of times when something new like this comes out, it trickles up rather than trickling down, right? It goes, well, at first it hurts, or it starts to become a problem. If something becomes known or a problem in your neighborhood, and then the city, and then, so where we are currently at is, I don't think there's any states that restrict short-term rentals. Federal government doesn't talk about it, probably never will. States probably, we'll see.
I think on a big scale, like a state, even a county, it would be extremely irresponsible for them to put any kind of ban or restriction on them, other than maybe registering or some guideline maybe.
Well, the state has gotten involved, specifically in our state and some others, but not at the restricting level. But we'll get into that as we talk about it. But really, where are we seeing it? We're seeing it in city level and HOA level, right?
Yep.
So how do we want to go about this? You want to go HOA first or city?
Yeah, well, sure. I feel like I'm remembering near my home, there was a large commercial lot that Walmart bought.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm remembering how crazy all of the neighbors, all of the neighboring HOAs got together and created a force that caused like Walmart to back out.
Yeah.
Right? They petitioned the whole thing. We didn't want a Walmart in our neighborhood and whatever. This is kind of the same kind of thing on a much smaller scale, right? People freak out about the unknown. We all freaked out about the Walmart unknown, which is a little bit more known because there's a lot of Walmarts around. We know what it does to neighborhoods, but still, it was an unknown and we didn't want it there, right? And that's kind of what people are doing here with Airbnbs sometimes, is they're like, oh crap, do we want these in our neighborhood? And I think you and I should talk a little bit about that, about the pros and cons to short-term rentals and why they're good and why they would be bad. Like, do you want one next to you?
Well, I guess, that's why we're talking about this. So I think our opinion's somewhat biased because we operate in the economics of real estate and we manage short-term rentals. So I'll admit that, but this would apply whether we did that. I think this would apply because I apply this theory to everything else. Is I don't agree with any blanket non-backed reason for banning anything when it comes to an avenue of operating an investment, right? So like restricting someone's ability to sell something or buy something or just go a certain path with how they're going to use an asset can be negatively affect the economics of not just that asset but everything around it in a lot of cases. So not just specific to this.
If I could recap what you just said, when you add any kind of restriction to a neighborhood or an area, you reduce the audience that can come in and buy in that area, which then reduces the value, potentially reduces the value of that home.
Yep. I mean, there's always a trade-off with any restriction. I mean, that's just the economics of supply and demand, really.
Yep.
So,
well, let's do this first, Kyle. Let's talk about the pros and cons of having a short-term rental in your area. And then let's talk about the different ways that an HOA and then cities have dealt with it or can deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
How's that sound?
Let's do it.
And I'm thinking specifically of if I had one next to me, if I'm talking to a neighbor that's concerned about this and they have an investor has bought a home next to them, right? That investor has two options. That investor can put a long-term tenant in there, or they can turn it into a short-term rental.
Or a midterm rental.
Otherwise known as Airbnbs. I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there because everybody stops me when I say short-term rental and they say, do you mean Airbnb? Yes, I mean Airbnb. I just hate giving Airbnb credit for it. So I'm not going to say it again, but that's what I mean. So now, that long-term rental, if they decide to turn it into a long-term rental, the advantages and disadvantages to that. The advantage is you could have a great neighbor there that's there for a long time, some consistency, some people you get to know, right, that become a good part of that community, right? What's the flip side, Kyle?
It can become a bad part of the community or anywhere in between. But the fact that you are less likely to a nuisance for a long period of time isn't really sound with the thinking. So, or like you have the potential of it being a nuisance or being a great tenant, right? In a short-term rental, you have the same thing, right? You have that's what you're getting at.
And yeah, this is what I'm getting at. And so that long-term rental, that long-term tenant is there for at least a year, on average 3.5 years, right? And if they're annoying you as a neighbor, they're going to annoy you for 3.5 years is the bottom line, right? That short-term rental, two big differences. One, they're only there for a few days probably, right? However many days that is. Could be 2 days. It could be a week, could be 30 days, whatever it is, but it's a much shorter period of time that you have to deal with them, right? If they're annoying you. Two, if they're doing anything that really breaks house rules, breaks or disrespects the community or the neighbors, we as hosts can handle that effectively and efficiently. Right?
Yeah.
To the point of removing that guest on a moment's notice if we need to. For instance, if they have a party, right? They've been told before they ever book the home that they can't have parties. I can remove them immediately. And we've done that.
Yeah. And those are always the fears, right? And then we get to see the reality a lot of, the likelihood of those parties and nuisance problems and all that stuff in all studies done and statistically is extremely low. You're more likely to have, very respectful people staying as guests and all that, and have a unit in your neighborhood that you can book when you want family to stay by, that kind of a thing. So I think the mindset behind it is usually skewed by what actually happens, because what really matters is the operations of that unit, right? Whether it's a long-term rental or short-term rental, crappy operations could get you crappy tenants. Crappy operations in a short-term rental can lead to no screening on guests or no high standards, which then leads to more of these problems. But again, that usually leads to those things being shut down or the operations changing. Because nobody wants to operate under those conditions either. People think hosts love bad guests. Nobody hates bad guests more than hosts, right? nobody wants parties less than you're in the house next to you, less than the host, right? They want good reviews. They want happy neighbors. Those are the things that make you money in a short-term rental, not the bad properties, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned it too. There's also a really organic. We live in a review-based economy,
Mhm.
right? And there's an organic two-way review system with all of these platforms that you use for short-term rentals. So in addition to the guest reviewing the property, we review the guest. It has a level of accountability.
Mhm.
Now, you could have somebody who doesn't care what their reviews say, but you know what? The reality is that person isn't going to be able to use that platform anymore if they trash a house or have a party, unauthorized party, or and then a host comes in and says, this is what they did. Now the next host is gonna look at that, and they're not gonna allow that person to rent their home, and so there's a natural, organic way of holding everybody accountable that I don't think these neighbors, these people that are considering these restrictions are really, considering,
Yeah.
right? Like, you don't have that when a Walmart or a hotel pops up in the lot next to you. You don't have any of those controls or accountability.
Yeah, and it does help the economics. I mean, like, short-term rentals can a lot of times sell for higher values than the other values in the neighborhood, leading to it being a comp to higher values in the whole neighborhood. So there's economic benefits to it, but, like, even on the flip side of this, if you're listening to us and, like, you agree with everything we say and all these opinions you would share, right? Well, do you think we're saying to just do nothing? No, I think we can agree that restrictions can be good, especially in certain neighborhoods or in certain cities, to help, incentivize or force the operations to operate a certain way. Like, I've seen things such as only parking on your lot, no sharing the street parking with the residents. They don't get access to the neighborhood amenities with the residents. There's a certain guest count for the house that restricts, the operations or the host just openly advertising for parties. Like 3-bedroom, 2 baths can't be booked by 25 people, right? That would be a problem. That would be an obvious problem. So, like, there's restrictions that could be agreed to, but, like, I mean, our baseline blanket opinion is, like, banning anything isn't the way to restrict things.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's get into some more of the solutions. But before we do
Yeah.
that, I want to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned something, the economic point, benefits to it. You know what are the economic benefits to bringing somebody into an area or a neighborhood or whatever it is you've now introduced somebody to an area, and that could be beneficial to that area. Like, every person that you bring in that stays for a period of time in that area has the potential to be like, wow, I really like this area. I really like that park that's down the street where I can go hiking. I really like the ability to be able to walk to restaurants and bars. I really like the ability to be able to drive 5 minutes to the new soccer stadium, whatever that is, right? And and so all of those things create kind of a natural economic factor of people wanting to potentially more people wanting to come into an area because now they've been introduced to it.
Mhm.
Almost like a sales pitch, right? Almost having like a bunch of sales pitches that wouldn't have been there if that short-term rental wasn't there, right? If I have 28 guests throughout the year that have come in and stayed in a home, I now have 28 more people that have been introduced to that area, and you never know how many of them might someday say, "You know what? Remember that short-term rental that we stayed in? I really like that area, and I think I'd like to live there and buy something there."
Well, and I've seen a trend, I've maybe not a trend, but we've seen, like, since this has all come to be, like, developers short-term renting their model home, which is exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the model home that used to be, this is what you come see on the weekends for showings and stuff, they're also Airbnb-ing it out, and those people are seeing a neighborhood get built, and, whether that's by shoppers or just people renting it is, you know,
I've never
either
heard of
way.
that. That's awesome. That's I mean, I have heard of people that so we do have an old before short-term rentals became popular, there was some companies that were doing, they were having people basically live in these model homes, right, as hosts, but they had to agree to allow them to be open during certain hours, right? So they can live there. But anyways, so it was basically a way for them to keep tabs on these model homes, right? And that didn't have a salesperson in them, and make sure they were safe and secure and didn't have any, anybody breaking into them or whatever. So, wait, sidetracked. Okay, so we were going to get into what some things that let's stick with HOAs, because HOAs is the easiest one, and I think that's the biggest one. So
I want to jump to the cities, but let's finish HOA, because at the macro scale, you can really see what we're talking about, because I have even examples of how this has happened in the real world.
Okay, let's do that then. Let's start with HOAs and move to cities. And so what can an HOA do to make the experience better for their neighborhood without just banning it? Right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like everything else, like put rules into place, totally fine. There's some, it's really case by case too, because there's some areas where like you should probably incentivize short-term rentals. Like it can really increase your values. Like especially if you just say, put something in place. And I will also caveat everything we say. Anything you put in place restriction wise should not start out underneath something that already exists, right? Like, for example, putting a cap on short-term rentals of 20% if that's what you want in your community. Like, well, if you're already at 60%, then that is an economic downfall problem. So I want to caveat that you should look at everything at a high level. But what you can do is obviously registration. You want to know things exist, right? Open communication. Like if you have if your HOA knows that something's a short-term rental and they register as a short-term rental and they have the host contact information and all that stuff, then they can deal with problems quickly and efficiently if they occur. If you don't do anything, then you don't even have that open line of communication, and things can get out of hand a lot quicker. People can get pissed off a lot quicker. What kind of things were you thinking of?
Well, no, that's one of them that I was definitely thinking of. That's a good way to handle it. Like, let's not restrict it. Let's monitor it, kind of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's know what's out there so that we can deal with it. And you know what that rental registration does for you as an entity, and cities do this and HOAs do this, is it gives them some authority to restrict it or shut it down, right? What I was also thinking was that HOAs and cities, they could do things like restrict, they could restrict the amount of, you could restrict almost anything without restricting the banning. You can restrict the number of days that it can be booked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that it's a minimum number of days, so you don't have small stays and so forth. You can restrict the number of short-term rentals in your particular neighborhood, right? If you're an HOA. I know that's what you were getting at, but still, it seems like if you kept it high enough, right, your concern that neighbors would have that everybody's going to have an HOA, a short-term rental, can be I'm losing the word I'm looking for, but it can be fixed by doing that, by restricting the percentage or the number of them that you can have in a neighborhood.
You can do that. I don't think you should. You should let the economics decide what your percentages lie out to. So
what are you trying to do, right? If you're trying to squash the concerns of neighbors instead of just banning it, this is just one option, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can restrict, if there's amenity offerings, you can restrict it just to residents, parking, like I said, occupancy count that makes sense and is reasonable, enforcement if you want, like fining if they break those rules. Those types of things can help make it more feasible, right? But again, that's all the things you can do. We can talk about that, all what you should do all day, but a lot of times what we've seen, especially when things come up quickly, is that the things that are done wrong, right? What have we seen that's done wrong? And I think that's more important to talk about, because on a macro scale, we've seen things done completely wrong. We've seen it done right as well. I've seen a lot in between. But like, here's just one example. Take a complex that you have short-term rentals in. Say just an apartment or a condo complex, because I've seen this one where they had a few problems with the short-term rentals and made swift action without analyzing how many of their units it was going to affect. So this was in a complex in Dallas where one problem happened with one guest, and they banned all short-term rentals like within a day's notice and kicked them all out, right? Well, they didn't realize that they were kicking out about 28% of their entire occupancy all within a day. That caused a problem. That caused a supply and demand problem. Now you have a very high supply with not to mention the demand, so you just devalued all of those units in that complex, right? That is not an opinion. That is just economically what happened, and economically what will happen when you take swift action that is not taking into consideration enough things. So you sound like you had a different example you wanted.
No, that's good. I like that. And the other thing that an HOA can do, I guess cities could do this too, but this is more of an HOA thing, is they could do something like requiring professional management, right? So that people that want to do this themselves, that don't have the experience and the tools that you need to do it really well, aren't doing it, right? So you can do it all day long, but it has to be professionally managed. And then we know that we can reach out to a professional manager a lot easier to mitigate a problem than we can an owner who may not have the ability or the know-how to mitigate a problem.
Yeah. So let's you could jump to cities?
Yeah, let's go for it. How are cities handling
mainly
it?
been dealt with at the city area on like a regulation tax basis, all that stuff. So a lot of cities are dealing with it with either zoning or city or code or a city ordinance. And regardless of talking through how those two things differ, like taxation has been a huge thing that has been cities are breaking it in when they decide to allow it, permit it, register it, and charge a city tax on it. And this is on top of the occupancy taxes that are always charged regardless. Like I've seen ranges from 6% city tax on short-term rental revenues all the way up to 15% tax on short-term rental revenues. And that when you add that 15 to the to the county occupancy and the state occupancy, which is usually like 6 here in Texas, you're looking at over 21% just short-term rental taxes, right? So that can be a tug and pull. Like now you only do, you're basically having people decide these things need to be really good. They need to make a lot of money in order to make this make sense.
Do I want to rent over there, or can I rent in a neighboring city that serves me just as well for my stay, that doesn't charge, doesn't cost as much because there's not as many taxes, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'd say we have really good examples close to home here, so we can use one. The one that outlines a lot of these problems is Arlington. What the city of Arlington in Texas was one of the first to deal with it. To be honest, like they quickly started discussing it, dealing with it. I think they ended up having the city ordinance, and by 2019, they did a city ordinance with a massive ban throughout the city, designated a short-term rental zone around the entertainment district, and they allowed certain zonings to continue doing it. But at an economic scale, the study they did was they shut down about 1,100 short-term rentals all in one fell swoop. Which what that does is what do you do when you have 1,100 short-term rentals and now all of a sudden you're not allowed to do it?
You flood the market with new rentals or sales because an owner has to do something with that property. They no longer operate it the way they are. And so now you have a whole bunch of furnished rentals or sales, which brings down your rental prices in that neighborhood, in that city, and potentially brings down, well, it doesn't potentially, it does bring down the increased inventory brings down your value.
And your availability of hospitality, listings and
yeah.
places for people to stay in town got extremely reduced. And ironically, it happened right before COVID. And then demand in that area picked up massively for people needing short-term rentals.
And that's where the surrounding cities really, right? They had to deal with the same thing because they were now being they were the beneficiaries. The owners in the surrounding cities were the beneficiaries. So I think all of the cities around Arlington handled it slightly differently, didn't they?
Yeah, Grand Prairie waited. Grand Prairie is the neighboring city about 2
I like the
miles
way they
from the
did it the
stadium.
best.
And they went the opposite route. They allowed it, register it, permit it, all those things, tax you. So they make money. It's permitted. They can shut you down. They have strict restrictions that they enforce.
They actually have
because they're right next to the stadium, so that flooded them with
Yeah.
short-term rentals. Because when one restricts supply, another provides the supply, they can benefit from it. So you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that they actually have a liaison, right? That you work with that does every single year they do our annual approvals, right?
Mhm.
Of everything that we've got in Grand Prairie, and they come out and inspect, and they just like an inspector would do at a hotel, right? They come out and make sure you're doing everything right. They're somebody that we have at our disposal that we can contact. They know who to contact when there's a problem. God forbid the police are called. They know exactly who to call, right? They've got your cell phone number. They've got my cell phone number. And it's kind of nice. There's a mutual respect there that happens because of the registration process.
And there's a link to the police. So, if the police get called to a short-term rental, they know it's permitted. They have the host contact information. They have protocols for if the host doesn't answer. You get fined if you don't, follow those protocols. It happens like a normal business would, or if a hotel violated something. And there's inspections annually and all those things for safety of guests and stuff like that. So, not to negate that Arlington is doing pretty much those exact same things for what they are allowing. But we were mentioning that the blanket ban essentially of all residential homes.
Right. They're doing they have a certain zone that they're allowing it in, and they're doing this kind of the same thing Grand Prairie is doing within that zone, but everywhere else. Arlington's a large city.
But they dealt with it swiftly, right? So, and then what we saw was HOAs swiftly follow that ban and ban it at an HOA level, even within the short-term rental zone. And then that caused micro markets to just get absolutely destroyed. I mean, we know examples of complexes in Arlington that the boom of 2020, 2021 and all those property value increases was negated by the effect of these bans and everything that happened. And that is not an opinion. That is a statistical number. There's prices of condos that I'm thinking of that you could have bought in 2019 for the same price you could buy today. Can't say that about a lot of areas. Can't say that about pretty much any areas that I can think of, other than that were affected by these tiny decisions that were solely based on short-term rental, and some examples were based on rental, just normal rental restrictions. But they have a massive economic effect.
People forget that the economic factors are always in place. There's basic economic factors, supply and demand. We talk about a lot on this podcast. And it is the root of almost every economic decision that you can make. And it's in real estate, you can see it almost immediately when there's a major supply and demand change that is caused by for any reason whatsoever.
Because uncertainty is great in any market too, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you brought up a certain condo complex, and I know which one you're talking about. And if we just talk about the numbers of what they did, they banned rentals altogether. They didn't ban them. They reduced it to 20%. This happens to be a condo complex with a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom condos. So what happens in those complexes? They're probably 80% of them are rentals, right? That's the norm in a complex like that. And even if I'm wrong, even if it's 50%, if you reduce that by 30%, the amount of people that now can't rent all of a sudden and are going to sell their home drastically reduces the value of those condos. And we've seen them come down. We've seen that market get flooded with condos that are on the market for months at a time, where normally there's 3 or 4 on the market in a normal market. Right now there's 10 to 20 on the market, and people are getting $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 less than
there was
they
over 30
would have.
There was over 30 last time I checked, and I know which one you're talking about too. I was actually talking about a different condo complex, specific to short-term rentals, but yeah, that one's even worse.
Those are examples of what happens
because they did both. Yeah,
when you restrict things is the point.
Yeah, that's the economics of it. I mean, if you can negate a nationwide boom or a worldwide boom of 50% pretty much with your actions, then maybe there was an effect of it. If there wasn't, the ironic part about that is if we had just in a steady market, it probably would have had even more drastic effects than it did. So what else? I mean, the cities, there's some that deal with it with zoning. There's some zoning can have its benefits to where it saves some of these economic effects, because a lot of zoning related changes and restrictions only apply forward. So you make a zoning change and whatever, well, in most cases, I'm not saying this applies everywhere, but in most cases, zoning changes are grandfathered in. So it's like, well, if you're already doing something before they change the zoning, then, you can't stop it and start it again or whatever, but it's not stopping you right now, right?
And that's just a way of discouraging further development of these short-term rentals, right?
Yeah.
So that's a way of kind of limiting it without limiting it, so to speak, and keeping your eye on the problem. Other cities have straight banned it, but chosen not to enforce it.
Yeah.
Which is another way of handling it, and kind of maybe trying to keep it at a minimum for the cheapest amount of money.
And one thing that especially early on, less now, it's more known because there wasn't as many examples, but especially at the beginning of all this start of regulation, the question of should we do this and can we do this wasn't asked enough. To where these things have been restrictions on short-term rentals have been massively challenged, as you can in some areas, as you can imagine. Like Austin comes to mind because it applies here in Texas to the different things that have happened. Denton had one that was lifted. So basically, they've been swiftly implemented in ways that aren't constitutionally sound, like full-out bans or certain things that you had bought the property with not in there that just show up out of nowhere, right? Like deed restrictions and stuff like that, because you're hurting the economics of the real estate investment.
Right.
Texas specifically has in its constitution that a landowner has the right to do what they want with their real estate. Well, obviously, that has been used to challenge this on people's homesteads. So it's still pretty much the opinion of after everything that's happened, that if we talk about the traditional sense of Airbnb, which is, say you live in the house, it's your house, you live in it, it's your homestead, and you just rent it out when you're gone. Well, technically, you can't really restrict that. You're just renting out your house to guests. So then there's this line drawn now between fully short-term rental and just a homestead rented out as well. So, which people have used to get around HOA restrictions and stuff like that.
I don't want to get into it in this discussion, but there's the room, the room share thing is caused, that's another concern that causes problems, right?
Yep.
When you rent out all 4 of your rooms to different tenants, then now you have 4 different cars out front that have to try to park somewhere, and 4 different people that could potentially be disrespectful, and so that causes a whole another set of problems, and that cities and HOAs would need to consider. And I think that one's probably a little bit more legitimate of a concern.
And going forward, this will usually so a lot of people don't know that HOAs and their rules are generally defined, or at least in a general sense defined with the planning and design of the development in mind. So like when the developer designs a big master project community, a lot of times how that HOA is going to operate and restrict things is planned out with that. And it's even set up by the developer initially. The developer is the HOA initially. And then they assign the board and all that stuff. But the point is that going forward, these things are probably going to be handled, on the front end, which would be good.
And we're starting to see a lot
because there's short-term rental communities popping up. There's communities popping up like encouraging short-term rentals because they're like, we're talking about the negative economics. It's been seen that there are definitely positive economics in a lot of places to allowing short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Because if investors can to investors, it's if you can make way more money than you can make short-term renting it. If it's 5 to 10 times, right? It's not going to be like that everywhere, but if it is, then their purchase value of that property is pretty much whatever they can get for it, right? I don't care. They're just like, it's pennies. If it's pennies on the dollar, then that actually helps the people who buy to live there because it will over time naturally increase the values of that complex as things trade hands. But there's also benefits to some, not having a full short-term rental community because then you could have supply problems. So, but how does the state get involved, right? We haven't jumped there. I briefly mentioned it. The legislature can get involved. The judges can get involved. We've seen county judges stop bans that were put in place by city councils because they said they needed to be proved constitutional. I've seen them deemed unconstitutional by judges, and they go away and they got to start over. Austin had a huge fight with the Supreme Court of Texas that I don't want to get into, but it ended with the Supreme Court having effect on that ban and it needing to be redone. So it can jump all the way up. We have not yet seen any of these situations jump to the U.S. Supreme Court, but
it's my opinion that the federal government and the state governments should only help maybe give cities and HOAs guidelines as to what they can and should do, right? And let the cities and the HOAs decide what they want to do because every city and every HOA is in a different situation, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, New York, like you can look up what happened with New York. Was completely different because it was an affordable housing argument. Whether every city can make an affordable housing argument against Airbnbs is definitely a no. Like it's not the same as New York City. So
New York City's dumb. New York City is the only city in the country that still doesn't have Uber and doesn't have a multiple listing service. I mean, like, really, why? They shoot themselves in the foot every chance they get.
I am not going to comment on that one.
No.
But you're right. You're right. I think I think they decided yesterday to tax second homes in New York City.
We're gonna tax the.
That's just hilarious. But from an economic statistical standpoint,
never mind. We're going.
We're not going there.
I'm deviating from our topic here, but I think we killed our topic, don't you? I mean, those are all the ways the HOAs and cities can have handled it, can handle it, and I think
it's definitely not all the ways we've seen. I mean, there's cities that have like banned it, but it's quote unquote still allowed it because they agreed not to enforce it. So it's like there's all these entities that involve at a city, like city council can make these rules and place an ordinance, but then code compliance got to enforce it. Well, if code compliance doesn't have any money, who's enforcing it? Like the police aren't going to enforce short-term rental law. That's never going to happen. It's not a law. Cities councils don't make laws, so they it's just this balance of like, does it all come together to make something happen? So,
yep.
And then if it's zoning's a different department too. Does zoning enforce with,
I think in general, if I'm an HOA, I'm a neighbor in a neighborhood, and I have a concern about Airbnbs, I would just do your research, look at whether it is actually a problem. And kind of my opinion, Kyle, I don't know how you feel but I feel like as a neighborhood, I would want to wait till it actually is a problem. Like, people are anticipating a problem before it's a problem. And so let's wait till we have a problem to deal with, and then we'll know better how we need to deal with it. Do we need to do a registration process? Do we need to limit something within short-term rental stays? maybe there's a really specific solution to solving a specific problem in a neighborhood or area instead of freaking out beforehand and just saying, let's just ban it.
Yeah, I think the responsive approach is the best way to do it. That's how we've done it with everything else. But, because then you have these added issues or economics that people don't take into account of like, why does so many of your city's sales tax and tax dollars go to entertainment districts and attractions and things that attract outside people, right? Because it helps your economy. It brings people in, helps the restaurants and all the other things. Like bringing people into your city is just in general good for the economics of your city, for the business owners and the businesses in your city. Well, having short-term rentals brings people into your city, right? That's just, I think everyone can agree on that. And when you restrict that, you can be restricting your own economy out. We're seeing that right now. We just discussed the city of Arlington and their ban, right? Well, the city of Arlington is hosting the World Cup to some degree in 2 months. And there is not enough short-term housing for the expected demand, right? They're expecting to be undersupplied for the expected demand. Did they expect the World Cup when they did that? Did they, any of those things? The amount of people we are talking to that are like, should I put my home up while it's here? Like, can I get a permit? It's like, well, all the people asking this can't get a permit. Well, is it a permittable thing if you're just sharing your home? All these questions we're talking about are coming up right now because they're all talking about hosting it for just a month to make, and Airbnb's out there throwing money at people to host their listings during the World Cup. That's like literally happening. So, the economics of all this are being shown ever since they're banned in many, many negative ways. But what's that doing? It's pushing people to stay in the outside economies. I mean, Mansfield, where we're at, Grand Prairie, Fort Worth, Irving, everywhere around that city is, to some degree, has short-term rental allowances and has incentivized them to, since 2019, build supplies of short-term rentals. So, and is that better that everybody coming in for the World Cup to see the U.S. or whatever it is going to have to stay 30 minutes away? I mean, obviously that's not better.
It's interesting. We know, I was sitting here thinking we didn't talk about Kennedale had an interesting way of dealing with them, and instead of banning them,
Kennedale's a cutout of Arlington, and it's essentially so.
Yeah, they also registered using a registration process like we described, but they also did some things that were interesting that I think are somewhat reasonable. They wanted to make sure that they were more than 1,000 feet away from a school or something like that. They couldn't have any two within a quarter mile of each other.
That was the most interesting one. It was you couldn't have once one was registered, there couldn't be another one registered within 500 yards of it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's kind of
interesting. So you won't get stacked with them no matter what you do.
We're not.
It's a radius.
We're not banning them, but let's make sure that we don't have a whole bunch of them, right? And that they're spread out a little bit.
Every person within a 500, I might be wrong. It might have been feet, 500 feet or 500 yards, but everyone within a 500-yard radius or touching the property line of that property or its complex got a letter saying it was about to be a short-term rental, and they had an opportunity to dispute it. It's just a very transparent way of dealing with it. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ways. So Arlington does for their own benefit, I will say, and they do allow them in other places in the city under certain zonings, but they have a map. They show you where all the active permits are at. So there's a transparency level of how to reach out to that person and really deal with the issue. So,
yeah.
What are some other ones? Texas. We go state level.
No, I don't know. I don't have any idea.
I don't think the legislature is ever going to touch that in the great state of Texas.
I don't think they should. I don't think states, counties, federal government.
That's not true. They might come back and say, "Hey, wipe out bans." I wouldn't be surprised to see them go backwards on something. But as far as further restricting, I wouldn't see that. So, but yeah,
we're in Texas. We're all about giving freedoms and letting people keep freedoms here in Texas. So I don't know, maybe in California,
cities have dealt with it differently. So I don't know if you guys have any questions on this. We clearly have a lot of back-end answers and opinions on the pros and cons of restricting, how you restrict, whether you should restrict, all those things. Feel free to give us a call, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. And we are out. Let's go. Boom, shaka laka.